welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson. Coming up on the programme, Los Angeles is bracing for more destruction from unprecedented blazes. Officials are dealing with 5 major fires which have forced some 130,000 people to evacuate. The California wildfires have sparked a political blame game. President-elect Trump is hitting out at the California governor, Gavin Newsom, for the destruction caused by the fires. After more than a 2-year-long presidential vacuum, Lebanon's army chief Joseph Aoun has today been voted in as the country's new head of state. Plus, we're going to be remembering Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, who's being laid to rest today after a state funeral in Washington. Hello and welcome to the program. We're going to begin in Los Angeles County, where several areas remain under what's called a red flag warning, with forecasters saying that critical fire weather is going to continue right through to Friday night. Well, the fires are already known to have claimed the lives of at least 5 people, and at least 2,000 homes have been consumed by the flames. Well, some 130,000 people remain under evacuation orders. Well, firefighters are continuing to fight the Palisades fire, which has burned more than 17,000 acres, and the Eaton fire that has burned through Pasadena and Altadena areas, charring more than 10,000 acres. Well, Hollywood A-listers have not escaped the wrath of the wildfires. Paris Hilton, Billy Crystal and Adam Brody, just some of the well-known figures to have lost their homes in those deadly wildfires raging through the Los Angeles area. Meanwhile, the actor Steve Guttenberg compared the force of the fire as devil's wind. Let's take a listen to what he said.
Fires have started. The fires are like small little fires this big. And then all of a sudden, because of this terrible wind, this is a wind that I've never seen. These are fires I've never seen before. The only wind I've ever seen like this has been in South Africa, the devil wind. There were people in wheelchairs trying to get out who didn't have time to put their footrests on. And we had to figure out how to pop a wheelie with these wheelchairs. There were little kids. There were mothers trying to find their kids. There were anxiety, panic attacks. It's terrible.
Well, we can speak now to Vince Vicari, who is a resident of Los Angeles, who was forced to evacuate his home and joins us now from Ventura, California, which is just outside LA. Vince, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us on what must have been a very stressful day or few days for you. Just tell us where you are now and how you got there and what it's been like these last couple of days.
Well, thank you. And it's great to be on the program. I'm currently about 60 miles north of LA and LA County up in Ventura, California. What helped make my decision to get to this particular area is because where I live is in the San Fernando Valley, very close to the Hollywood Hills, close to Universal Studios. And there's 4 fires that are all over, spread out on every corner of the San Fernando Valley. And when the Hollywood Hills fire started last night, I started realizing I had very few exit points left to leave the city if I needed to evacuate. I originally thought I was gonna go to San Diego and head south, but after the Hollywood Hills fire started, I was worried about traffic and gridlock going south to leave the city. So with I-5 being blocked to go north up towards Sacramento, I really felt that my only option was to go up and around the San Fernando Valley and hook into the 101 North that hasn't been affected by the fires yet, and try and exit as far away as I can from LA before the winds and the fires picked up and did who knows what else.
I mean, it sounds, Vince, from what you're saying, like you're acting very much on your own initiative. Aren't you getting directive or instructions or information cascading down from the authorities there in California? Yes,
no, we are getting a directive, but what's happening is the wind shifts, the Santa Ana winds have been so strong and turbulent and unpredictable that they'll just shift without a moment's notice. And one of the things that's happened is they've reported that embers from a wildfire have traveled over 2 miles and then just settled somewhere on the ground and started a wildfire over there. And so because of that unpredictability, it felt like things were just kind of closing in on the San Fernando Valley. And because there's over 9 million people in LA County, I was concerned that if and when it's my time to go, I didn't want to wait until they said go because of all the traffic and gridlock. Because you got to imagine also traffic lights are out, power is out. So beyond these fires in LA County, there's a lot of instability in terms of electricity on the grid.
Right, so you could have faced a real bottleneck trying to get out of your area had it come to that.
Yes.
Did your neighbors follow suit, or have they stayed behind? And what do you know about your neighborhood right now? What the situation is right now?
It's all hit and miss. A couple of folks in my apartment complex were deciding to stay. One of the last deciding factors for me, I live in North Hollywood, kind of like on the border of Toluca Lake, Studio City, Hollywood Hills. A fire had started in Studio City out of nowhere from the Hollywood Hills fire. I guess an ember had come up and over the hill. That was a deciding factor for me because that was within 2 miles of where I live, and that was too close for comfort for me. So I talked to other friends. Some had evacuated hours earlier just in case. Others were trying to wait it out. So it's really just been up to someone's decision to wait until you're told to go or just go preemptively because things have been so unpredictable.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And as you say, a very rapidly changing situation. What could you see from your apartment when you were still there? And I mean, was it noticeable in the air quality as well that there were some major fires raging not so very far away?
Yes. Where I was located, I could see all 3 of the major fires. The Eaton fire to the left of me, which I guess would be the east, and then the Palisades fire to the right of me, which would be the west, and then behind me, north of me, was the Sylmar fire, or the Hearst fire. I could see all of those from the balcony of my apartment. And as I was sitting outside at sunset with my friend, catching up and taking a break, we saw directly in front of us the fire start in the Hollywood Hills. And that was just too much to take in because there's smoke coming from all angles, just drifting into downtown Los Angeles. And my vantage point was everything. And I had to go into Glendale, which is close to Pasadena, to get a tire fix because I had a flat tire due to a nail on the freeway the night before when I got off of work. And so having to wait for roadside service for over 2.5 hours also played a factor in me deciding when and how I should leave because I just kept seeing more and more fires pop up, and there's still a whole nother day of wind gusts ahead of us.
So when you packed up your house, which you must have done in very little time, I mean, clearly you had to prioritize very quickly what you were going to take, what you were going to leave. And did you walk out of the door thinking, this place might not be here when I come back?
So ironically enough, I had just moved into a new apartment. So most of my things were already in boxes. So that made gathering my belongings very easy, fortunately for me. But I feel confident, but not completely confident that everything will be there when I get back, only because the wind shifts are unpredictable and chaotic is the most articulate way I can explain things. And even though I'm in more of a centralized part of a city, watching Pasadena burn is unprecedented. And watching the Hollywood Hills be evacuated down into Hollywood is unfathomable. Watching Santa Monica be under evacuation orders is something you never think about because those are such iconic places by water, by public, heavily populated areas, that it's not something you would ever think could actually happen. And then when you see that actually happening in front of you, it's terrifying. And you don't know what could be next, where these winds could blow and how far an ember could carry. And even if you are in a city part of LA County, that an ember could still spark a fire in a park or in an apartment building. And that is way too close for comfort for me.
Sure. And so in the last 24 hours, I mean, you must have come across a lot of different people with a lot of different moods. I mean, obviously fear being a very logical and very obvious feeling for people to have at a time like this. But what other sort of moods did you pick up on? I mean, is there a sense of anger, for example? Because we've been hearing, obviously, like every situation of this kind, it quickly gets politicized. I mean, are you sensing there is a blame game as well going on right now?
Where I've been, no, I've not experienced any kind of anger. It's more of just, this is terrifying. What can we do to help each other? And what do I need to do? And where do I need to go? And you got to keep in mind, there's a large population of people in LA and LA County who aren't native Californians. So I'm a native Californian. I grew up in Northern California. I have been seeing and experiencing wildfires for the past 15 years. But a lot of folks are brand new to LA and they are not privy to wildfires. And so a lot of them don't know how serious to take it, or they don't understand how fast a wildfire can move in these dry conditions. But I haven't heard any kind of anger or resentment. I was in the grocery store stocking up on perishables to put in my car and put gallons of water in my car. The mood was just calm, but also let's get things done. Let's get prepared and see what the directive is for our particular area. And also, everyone has friends and family scattered throughout the region. So everyone's also trying to coordinate evacuation efforts. Can we come there? Do you need help going somewhere else? That's been the focus that I've experienced in the past 24 hours, is monitoring what's happening and then trying to figure out where to help and where I should be prepared to go.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the firefighters have been heroic, and in some cases battling the fires against all odds. I mean, a real losing battle in some cases with what are called red flag conditions, really overstretched. But, you know, in some cases they're having to operate, you know, whole areas, like in Pacific Palisades, it's being reported they only had 2 or 3 fire engines, and some of them didn't even have any water. I mean, there must be a sense of, wasn't there some more adequate planning for this, given that, you know, there have been these predictable, you know, markers like a lack of rain, you know, so obviously very dry terrain, and high temperatures, and all you needed was wind. I mean, there was an element of predictability, wasn't there, to all of this?
I'm not sure, because from what I've gathered, these wind gusts have been about 24 hours ago, we're at 90 miles an hour wind gusts. And since I've been here in Los Angeles for about 7 years, I have not experienced anything to that magnitude. And I can't speak to the areas in the Pacific Palisades because I don't live by the coast, but as well as in the Hollywood Hills and in Burbank and in Glendale, those areas don't typically see anything like this. So I personally don't know how anyone could prepare for this perfect storm, pardon the pun, of elements that contributed to this factor with the drought, with the winds. And we only got maybe 48 hours notice that high winds were coming. And then from there, it's trying to figure out, okay, how impactful are these winds actually going to be? Is it just an abundance of caution, or is it actually serious? And it turned out to be actually serious.
Okay, and Vince, just before I let you go, I mean, obviously a lot of words are being used, a lot of cliches are being used to describe what we're seeing on our screens. And I mean, it really does look, and I'm not the first person to say this, but it looks apocalyptic. Other people saying it sounds like something out of a film. I mean, what's your way of describing what you've seen these last 24, 48 hours?
What I'm seeing is grim. It's hard to stay optimistic with you see all these smoke and fires around you. Even if folks aren't in ground zero at these fires, it is affecting the entire LA County region. It's grim, it's unpredictable, it's chaotic, and there's an uncertainty about what the winds will do next and how these fires will get under control and when, because as of right now, a whole day later, there's still zero containment for 2 of these fires, and they've burned collectively over 30,000 acres. So the unpredictability is one of the biggest things coming to my mind, which is why I didn't want to wait until they said it's an evacuation order. I said, I'm getting out of here. My stuff is packed. I don't want to wait until however many hundreds of thousands of other people are trying to also leave the county at the same time. I want to get out now before it's too late and I get stuck in anything and regret not leaving sooner.
Okay, well, we hope you stay safe, and thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Vince Vicari, thanks a lot.
Of course.
Well, let's get some more analysis, and we can speak to Dr. Chad Hansen, wildfire scientist and fire ecologist with the John Muir Project. Dr. Hansen, you're also the author of Smokescreen: Debunking Wildfire Myths to Save Our Forests and Our Climate. We'll talk a little bit about your book in just a moment and the arguments that are made in there. But let me just ask you, first of all, what went through your mind when you first started seeing pictures like the ones we've been looking at of the devastation and the scale of these infernos in parts of California?
Just shock and sadness. These are communities that I know well. I was born and raised in Los Angeles area, and I spent a lot of time in these communities. I have friends and family members who live in these communities, and it's hard to see the impacts. Especially some of the images of entire neighborhoods just wiped out. It's my heart goes out to all those communities that have been so heavily impacted.
And for someone like you who's been studying forest ecosystems, who's been studying these types of fires for many years, I mean, is there and was there a sense of inevitability about all of this?
Yes and no. There's an inevitability about it in terms of the weather events. The Santa Ana winds are an intrinsic meteorological phenomenon in Southern California. They typically happen in the fall or early winter, and they're very, very intense winds, extremely dry, coming off the high desert, off the Mojave Desert, over the mountains, and the winds roaring down those mountain slopes at hurricane speeds toward the Pacific Ocean. In those conditions, and when the relative humidity in the air is in the single digits, if you have an ignition, you are going to have very significant fires. And so, these are fundamentally weather and climate events. And climate change is certainly an influence and is exacerbating things. So the weather events will happen, the fires will happen. This was a particularly extreme one. There's no question about that, even for Santa Ana winds. But what's not inevitable are the losses of homes and lives. That is not inevitable. It is possible to do much, much better than that, but we have to shift policies away from our current approach and toward an approach that is proven to be far more effective.
Policies like what? Because, I mean, from what I understood from excerpts of your book, fires are part of the natural course of things in forests. They play a role, as you say in your book, as important as rain. So doesn't this boil down to the fact that humans have decided to live in areas that come with a huge degree of risk? Namely, if you live near a forest, there will be fires.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a land use planning issue here. But the reality is that in the United States, our forest, our wildland fire policy, our fire policy is basically focused on forests and forest management. This idea that if we remove a bunch of trees from forests, that's somehow going to stop fires or curb fires, and that's going to stop them from reaching communities miles away. Here's the problem. Number one, most of the communities that are impacted by fires and that are at risk from fires are nowhere near a forest. These are not forest communities in Los Angeles that are being impacted by these fires. They're in grasslands, they're in foothill vegetation, chaparral, shrub habitat. And so the whole conversation about forest management is completely divorced from the reality of where these communities are located. It's completely irrelevant, conversation to most of the towns that are actually impacted, especially in these current fires. But even in the towns that actually are up in the mountains, in the forests, these big forest management projects, these logging projects, usually under euphemisms like thinning and fuel reduction, they're not stopping fires. The fires are actually moving even faster, oftentimes, through these areas where thinning and other tree removal has occurred, and then they're burning down towns. So I think we need to rethink this whole thing and understand that this is not a wildland vegetation management issue. This is a community safety and community protection issue, and it has to be done at the community with home hardening, defensible space pruning immediately around each home, and evacuation planning and assistance. That's where the money needs to go. That's where the focus and attention needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, with the fires still raging, I mean, obviously it's a little early for us to be looking towards changes in policy. But obviously, do you see a day once the fires have been extinguished when perhaps there is a long, hard look at the policies surrounding safety there in California and fire safety in particular? And do you think they will put into place new measures and perhaps even barriers to try to protect communities from these kinds of massive fire?
Well, barriers wouldn't work. I mean, that kind of a conversation has happened before. The problem is that the great majority of homes that burn in wildfires, and this is true in these fires in Los Angeles area, the great majority of homes that burn in wildfires do not burn from direct contact with flames. They burn from the embers that are driven by the winds that are driving the flames. And those embers will go a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, sometimes 4 miles in advance of the flames. And they will rain down by the millions. Anything that potentially can burn will ignite. And so that's why we have to focus on making the homes themselves and businesses and other structures, churches, schools. We have to focus on making them much more fire resistant. And there are a lot of simple steps that can be done to do that. And we have to focus on better evacuation planning and assistance to communities to do that evacuation planning, because and also doing the drills and the training so people know the best ways to get out of the community without creating gridlock and some of the things that we've seen where too many people are trying to get out a particular direction when there might be 2 or 3 other ways to get out. And then everything stops and no one can move and people have to get out of their cars and run from the flames. We've seen that multiple times. And we can do better and we can protect communities better, but communities need the help. The problem is, as long as our whole conversation is on subsidizing backcountry logging projects on remote national forests that are dozens of miles away from these communities that are most at risk, sometimes hundreds of miles away, what we're doing is simply ignoring the real problem and leaving these communities vulnerable. But to your question, I think this conversation needs to happen at all times. It needs to happen after the fires. It needs to happen before the fires, and it needs to happen during the fires, because lives are at risk. The public safety is at stake here, and we don't have time to defer the conversations about the policy shifts that need to happen in order to keep people safe.
Sure. And just lastly, Dr. Hansen, you were mentioning there about the types of structure that are there and making them more fire resistant. One of the pieces I read has suggested that because of the fact that you're in an earthquake zone there in parts of California, buildings have to have a certain amount of flexibility, and that does therefore make them a little bit more fire risk, more flammable. Is that true in your opinion?
No, I've seen no evidence of that. You can take steps that are very effective to make a wood structure much more fire resistant. It's even better if the structure is not made of wood, made of materials that don't burn. But you can make the steel structures or masonry. There's all kinds of building materials that can be employed. But the main thing is that there are certain key things that need to be done to make sure that homes don't burn, regardless of what they're made of. Let me just give you an example, two examples in terms of what we call home hardening. One is just, if you drive around areas, you'll see in different communities, you'll see oftentimes accumulations of dry leaves on roofs that are sometimes 5 or 6 inches deep. And what happens is when the embers are blown by the winds far in advance of the flames, they will land on the roof and they will roll down and collect in those piles of dry leaves, and they'll cause an ignition and it'll ignite the roof and burn the house down. That's a simple thing that can be done, and not everyone can sweep the leaves off their roofs. There are people who are older and can't do it physically. They need the help. Some people can't do it financially. They need the help. Embers fly into attic spaces through very coarse wire mesh. Some of the older houses, they have very coarse wire mesh, 1/4-inch mesh, and the embers fly right through that. They go into the attic, they ignite the attic and burn the house down. But you can very, very inexpensively replace those with a fine wire mesh, 1/8 inch, even better, 1/16 inch mesh, and the embers won't go through that. So there are really simple things that can be done that will that will prevent houses from burning, and of course, most importantly, keep people safe. But we really need to focus more resources there. Only a small fraction of our wildland fire resources are actually going to community safety. Most of them are going to subsidize some type of vegetation removal, usually tree removal, out in remote forests far from towns, and it's not working. It's a total failure.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for taking the time to share your expertise with us. Dr. Chad Hansen, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Republicans have been seizing on these wildfires that have torn through the Los Angeles area, blaming Democratic policies for the deadly wind-fueled fires. Well, President-elect Trump has taken to Truth Social media, saying that the outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden is to blame for the insufficient supply of fire hydrants and water. He also promised to end what he called gross incompetence and mismanagement when he takes office on the 20th of January. Well, President-elect Trump has also blamed the California governor, Gavin Newsom, for the devastation and called on him to resign. Well, Trump and Newsom have clashed bitterly in the past over a whole host of issues.
If those people leave, you're going to lose half your tax base of California. This is a true tragedy, and it's a mistake of the governor, and you could say the administration. They don't have any water. They didn't have water in the fire hydrants. They don't have water. And yet they have, the water comes from, you know where? Up north. And it comes down at levels, they give millions and millions of barrels of gallons of water that they have, and they send it out into the Pacific. For the Pacific, it's like a drop, it's nothing. But for California, it would take care of the whole state. So what's happened is a tragedy, and the governor has not done a good job. With that being said, I got along well with him when he was governor. We worked together very well, and we would work together. I guess it looks like we're going to be the one having to rebuild it. But what happened there, I don't think there's anything that I've ever seen quite like it. And the insurance companies are going to have a big problem, because you're talking about big, big dollars.
President-elect Trump speaking there. Well, Governor Newsom has hit back, accusing President-elect Trump of politicizing these wildfires.
One can't even respond to it. I mean, it's people are literally fleeing. People have lost their lives. Kids lost their schools. Families completely torn asunder. Churches burned down. This guy wanted to politicize it. I have a lot of thoughts, and I know what I want to say. I won't. I stood next to a president of the United States of America today, and I was proud to be with Joe Biden, and he had the backs of every single person in this community. He didn't play politics, didn't try to divide any of us.
California Governor Gavin Newsom speaking there. Well, let's cross to Los Angeles, and we can speak now to Jerry Edling, the editor for KNX News Radio in LA. Thank you so much for joining us. Just tell us, Jerry, what's happening around you and what the latest is with regards to those wildfires.
Well, basically, the wildfires are continuing to burn. There's no let up in the fire weather, and so they've already destroyed more than 2,000 structures. We're actually dealing with 7 wildfires in the Los Angeles area. The first one broke out in Pacific Palisades, which is a very wealthy area adjacent to Malibu, and has spread to the west to Malibu and sort of engulfing the entire Pacific Palisades area. And just last night or yesterday, there was a new fire that broke out in the Hollywood Hills, also a very affluent area. These are all areas where celebrities have homes and things like that. Tragically, there have been a number of deaths in the fires. Most of them due to, there was one in the Altadena area, and actually 3 people were found there, and there have been a total of 5 deaths. So firefighters are continuing to work against the fires, but there's not going to be a let up in the weather until the probably the end of the week.
And what's happening where you are precisely? I mean, can you smell smoke in the air? Does it make your eyes water? Are you not feeling like you're in danger yourself? Tell us what's going on around you, Jerry.
It's things around here are, it is a little smoky. It's not unbearable, but I'm talking to you from about, probably 5-10 miles from the fires. And I can't see the flames from here, but I can see the smoke. It's like a billowing white cloud. And white is actually a good color, because that means the firefighters are gaining a little ground on it. That's usually the smoke you get with the water. You get black smoke when they're not making any progress. But we still have 0% containment. But going back to where I am, we're a little south of the fire, and we're on the other side of downtown downtown Santa Monica. So we're somewhat shielded, but everybody in the Los Angeles basin can see the smoke. I mean, with the 7 wildfires going, it's hard to miss.
I mean, you've been covering news events there in California for some time. I mean, when was the last time California saw something on this scale?
That's a really good question. I came here in 1995, and it was a year after the giant earthquake that was centered. It was called the Northridge earthquake, and it was centered in sort of northern Los Angeles. And that was devastating. When I came here, there were ground straps on all the buildings, and a number of apartment buildings were still red tagged, which meant they were totally unlivable. That's the only thing I can see that's comparable to this. This is the largest fire and fire disaster in Los Angeles County history. Los Angeles County being an immense county that includes not only the city of Los Angeles, but Beverly Hills, Malibu, everything but the city of Los Angeles. And so that's the only comparison I can give. We've had large fires since, but nothing on this scale, nothing in such a populated metropolitan area. All the others have been sort of in the outlying brush-filled areas. So this is incomparable in recent memory.
Just before we crossed to you, Jerry, we heard a clip of your governor, Gavin Newsom. We also heard the President-elect Donald Trump blaming Gavin Newsom, calling on him to resign. He said, quote, "This is all his fault." Do you think Gavin Newsom is likely to resign? And how do people there in California feel about this being politicized in these very early stages of the disaster?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't think Newsom is going to resign. He's actually very popular in California, and a lot of people on the left, particularly, are just going to dismiss what Trump said as more politics. I will say that this has been an ongoing battle. Mr. Trump has brought this up in the past about fire management in California, and that is a very controversial issue, and there has been some criticism on all sides of that, because California goes through a cycle. You basically have a wildfire, you sort of you lose the anchoring ground brush through that fire, and that makes it vulnerable to mudslides. And then the mudslides happen in the winter, and they clear out more land, and as a result, you have a lot of virgin land where more brush grows, and then you get another wildfire. So it's difficult to manage under any circumstances, but the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection has taken a lot of criticism for that on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, I mean, South California has had, as you've been saying, it's got this unusual cycle, 2 decades of drought, I gather, followed by 2 wet years, and then no rain for 8 months. And, you know, given that very unusual sequence of climatic events, I mean, very hard to imagine how the authorities there could have planned for such a scenario. I mean, is there a feeling there in California that planning was inadequate?
There is a feeling in some quarters that it was, and then other people say it's impossible to manage. I mean, there was even a chorus of people who say, well, maybe we shouldn't build there. You know, it's going to happen. Like, for example, Malibu is a good example. Malibu had a giant fire maybe 2 or 3 years ago. It was called the Woolsey Fire. And they're still talking about it. They're still rebuilding in Malibu from that. But now we have this other gigantic fire and it's moving into the. It's already destroyed a number of homes in the southern part of Malibu, which is where a lot of beach houses are connected. It's almost like a row of beach houses, and a number of them have been destroyed. So Malibu is getting it again, but there's also a sentiment that why did we build here to begin with? Why not just leave it where it is and we won't have these problems? But anyway, it's a difficult state to manage, but there has been a lot of criticism of the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. And the hope, I think the sentiment is that maybe California could work with the federal government a little better on that. But who knows? It may just be an unmanageable situation.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Jerry Edling, editor for KNX News Radio in Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Now turning our attention to Lebanon, where lawmakers have elected Joseph Aoun as the country's president. Well, this decision comes after a 2-year vacuum and 12 failed attempts to elect a head of state. Well, the proceedings were not without drama. The first round of negotiations earlier on today were met with loud disagreements between a few lawmakers. Well, Lebanon follows a sectarian power-sharing system where the president must be a Maronite Christian, the prime minister a Sunni Muslim, and the speaker of parliament a Shia Muslim. Well, this often causes political deadlock. However, earlier today, a second round of voting following consultations delivered a victory for Aoun, who was the front runner. Well, this latest development is seen as a positive one for the country that's been living under a tense ceasefire with Israel, and as well as that, suffering from an economic collapse, and follows on from years of weak rule followed by widespread corruption. Well, most international aid for Lebanon is contingent on a functioning government. Meanwhile, the Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar was quick to congratulate Lebanon on Aoun's appointment, wishing him for, quote, good neighborly relations and expressing hope that this would be achieved. Well, for the latest and an in-depth look as well at what this means for Lebanon, we're joined now by Michel Helou, the Secretary General of the Lebanese political party, the National Bloc. Thank you so much, Michel, for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Are you pleased with this outcome?
Thank you. Yes, I think the outcome is positive. First of all, because it puts an end to a more than 2-year vacancy in the Lebanese presidency. Finally, Lebanon has a president, and without a president, not only there's no solid executive power, but also parliament cannot pass and vote laws. So the entire government was completely blocked. So this is good news. It's good news even more because the new president, Joseph Aoun, is a respected person, and I believe he will do good for the country. He will do some good work. He has, displayed his stances, his main political vision through a speech that was widely acclaimed as finally a good, solid political vision for the country. So overall, I think it is positive for the country. I think most of the parliament supported him, 99 votes out of 128. And I think also that a very large part of the Lebanese public opinion is supportive of Joseph Aoun, as well as a large part of the international community.
Okay, so you paint a picture of someone who's widely respected. You're giving me the impression you think he's the right man for the job. Very basic question, but just want to be clear on this one, because a lot of people might be confused. He's no relation, is he, of the former president, Michel Aoun?
No relation at all, yeah. Aoun is a very common family name in Lebanon.
Okay, now, of course, in Lebanon, there's a huge sense of mistrust between the people and the political class, and I think it goes back some way now. Do you think this step that's been taken today, the filling of that vacancy after 2 years, goes some way towards restoring that trust?
Yes, definitely. It's a step in the right direction. Let's be realistic. This is obviously not the end of the road. This is not, how can I say, a huge reform in itself or a huge step forward. But it's at least, let's say that it sets the beginning of the way it opens the possibility of rebuilding and reforming our country. And I think that this in itself is a very, very, very important milestone. So this is why it's positive. It's also positive because let's not forget that we have just lived a devastating 14-month war, and 4,000 people killed, more than 1 million people displaced, Israeli occupation of 60 villages in the south. So now what happens is with Joseph Aoun, we know that at least we have a solid president and a respected one, specifically from a security and military perspective, that can negotiate with the Americans and the Israelis and impose the proper implementation of the ceasefire. So this will allow us, inshallah, to put a complete end to the fighting, make sure that the Israelis withdraw completely from Lebanon, but also make sure that the Lebanese state reclaims the south of the country from all militias and specifically from Hezbollah. And also, even more important than that, make sure that Hezbollah hands its weapons back to the state so that we can disband all militias in the country. It's been more than 56 years that the country is run by militias or is occupied partially by militias. This is the time for the state to reclaim the entirety of the territory. And I think now it is finally possible. And Joseph Aoun has said it very clearly in his speech, and that's very, very important.
Okay, so as we've been saying, he's got the support of Parliament. He's domestically respected. You were touching on there the sort of the international image that he has, and it's important, isn't it, that whoever the president of Lebanon is has the support of Lebanon's allies, and I'm obviously thinking of Washington, but not only. You're saying that Joseph Aoun does have that rapport. He does have the respect that he needs from Lebanon's main allies.
Yes, definitely. Joseph Aoun has proven a good soldier, a very good commander, has been in charge for close to 8 years now of the Lebanese army and has done a very solid job. He also has no rumors or no, corruption dossiers or topics around him or accusations, which is good in a country where, unfortunately, the political class is known for widespread corruption. So this is very good. He's a clean man. He's very respected and very, seen as a professional commander, be it by the Americans that have helped train him for the last decades, or by the French or by the Saudis, with whom he has very solid relations. So this will be very much welcomed by all those three powers that are, let's say, the top 3 countries supporting Lebanon financially, militarily, and politically as well. So I think it's a good step because, unfortunately, the state of the country does not allow us to, basically be completely isolated. This is what we've been suffering from over the last 10, 15 years, is that because of the grip of the Iranian axis through Hezbollah on Lebanon, we've been gradually put away and isolated from the international community. Joseph Aoun's elections helps us come back in the international community. At least it opens the possibility of us gaining back some trust from our partners, and they should be able to help us to rebuild, because we will need a substantial financial help in order to rebuild the country. Joseph Aoun will open the door to that.
Indeed, and when we were talking about allies of Lebanon, there's one very important ally that isn't a country, and that is, of course, the IMF. And they're going to be expecting big things from Lebanon in terms of reforms, and that'll all, whether or not those reforms are implemented will determine whether or not Lebanon gets the money it needs. Is Joseph Aoun going to be able to ensure that those reforms are carried out? Not
alone, and this is where we will need a solid government. IMF is an absolute priority for Lebanon. So if you want to sum up in the end the 2 main large pillars that he will have to achieve, let's say, or build in his presidency, one of them is that the state reclaims its sovereignty from a military, defense, diplomacy, and security perspective. That is absolutely crucial. It is the first one, implementing the ceasefire, enforcing the monopoly of violence and of weapons in the arms of the state. And the second one will be the economic and financial sovereignty through reform. IMF reforms that will have to go through a proper Banking Resolution Act and distribution of losses. This is a difficult decision to be made. Currency reform and restructuring of public debt, because the country and the state are bankrupt today. In order to be able to do that, he will have to be able to work with a solid government that also has the same reformist agenda. So now the next step is to make sure that we appoint a solid, respected, reformist prime minister that doesn't have any conflicts of interest with any partners, specifically with the banks that are involved in the financial crisis that we've been going through for the last years. So we will be monitoring that appointment, and we'll be pushing a lot in order for us to have a reformist prime minister and a solid government to achieve the reforms and very quickly go through an IMF program.
I mean, the fact that Lebanon's been without a president for more than 2 years, and by the way, that isn't the longest that Lebanon's been without a president for in recent times. There was the period May 2014 to October 2016. I mean, doesn't this show that this system where we have a Maronite Christian who has to be the president, the prime minister has to be a Sunni, the speaker of parliament must be a Shia, I mean, doesn't this perhaps suggest that the system does need something of an overhaul, and is it likely to get one?
Before an overhaul, the system needs to be applied and respected. The biggest problem that we've been facing is not the system, is the no system or the absence of system. Because the constitution that was evolved, let's say, or rewritten in 1989, a Ta'if constitution, was never applied after the end of the Civil War. And this is the main issue that we're facing. And it's been changed, it's been violated so many times, and specifically after 2008 and the Doha Accords, after a mini civil war that Hezbollah caused in the country when they invaded Beirut. They forced to include some transformations to the constitution that has affected the ability of the system to work. So our goal is first and foremost to undo the Doha agreements of 2008, to come back to the proper 1989 Ta'if constitution, to apply it properly, which means ending the militias in the country, doing decentralization, proper independence of the judiciary, implementing the proper articles in the law that allow us to elect a president. The problem we have in electing a president is that there has been some, fake habits or let's say artificial habits that have been applied. For instance, the fact that they're asking for 2/3 of the MPs to be present and to vote in the first round in order for us to have president. Those are all, let's say, inventions that have prevented the system from working. So first, let's implement that system. Let's respect it. And then we will work on improving it, because definitely it does need improvements. You've talked about the importance of maybe overcoming sectarianism and the division of roles through sects and through confessions. Well, this is definitely something we need to work on. But let's be also realistic. Our society is still polarized along sectarian lines. So there's no way we can get rid of the sectarian positions right now, right away, especially at the top. If you do that today, at the top, presidency, prime minister, you cause, I believe, close to a civil war. So let's undo the system and the issues and the problems that it had caused, starting from the bottom, because there's a lot to be done. And gradually, along with creating and building a more modern society, less confessional, less sectarian, we will be able also to build a less sectarian system.
Okay, Mark, Michelle, just lastly, before we wrap up, I just want to ask you, a sort of a hypothetical question. On this channel, these last few months, we've been closely covering events in Syria and the downfall of Bashar al-Assad that no one saw coming. We saw the demise of Hassan Nasrallah and the degradation of Hezbollah. Would we have got to this point that we're at today, where there is now a president, and it looks like Lebanon is sort of going to stage something of a comeback by the looks of things? Everyone's optimistic. Would we have got to that point if those other events hadn't taken place?
Unfortunately not. And this is a huge issue. The reality is that Lebanese political parties have been blocking the election of president. On top of them, Hezbollah and their allies. So had Hezbollah agreed earlier on to elect a president, to attend the electoral sessions, we would have been able to avoid all that. Had Hezbollah agreed in 2000 or in 2005 or any time when we had those discussions to hand its weapons back to the state and to respect the decision of the government, we would have avoided all that. We would have avoided the death and destruction of Hassan Nasrallah and the weakening of Hezbollah. After the collapse of Bashar al-Assad and of the Iranian axis, we finally have an opportunity. And my message to the Lebanese and specifically the Lebanese politicians is we don't have the right to squander that opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us on this historic day. Michel Herlou, Secretary General of the Lebanese political party, the National Bloc. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
In other news, the former US President Jimmy Carter is being laid rest today beside his wife Rosalynn in his hometown of Plains, Georgia. Well, Carter was 100 years old when he died, making him the longest living US president before his death, which is on the 29th of December. Well, after lying in state at the US Capitol for 2 days, Carter is being honored at the Washington National Cathedral. Well, the incoming US President Donald Trump is amongst those to have paid their respects. Well, for more, we can speak now to Paul Glastris, a former chief speechwriter to President Bill Clinton. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Paul. I know you never actually met President Carter yourself, but a number of your colleagues did. What did they say about him?
Yeah, a number of the writers and editors of the Washington Monthly, my magazine, worked as Carter speechwriters. And they had a very different relationship to Jimmy Carter than I had to the president I worked for, Bill Clinton. They, at the time of his presidency, both admired him and were deeply frustrated by him. And his presidency ended poorly, and it was a time of great frustration for Democrats and liberals generally. But to a person, each of them grew to admire the man more as the years went by, both for the issues that he wrestled with as president, as well as his exemplary and active post-presidency.
Yeah, that's something we've heard actually already on this channel, someone saying something along those lines, that President Carter's post-White House career was in many ways more impressive than his actual White House career. Why do you think that was?
Well, he really created the post-presidency. Prior to Jimmy Carter, no president had built a life and an active role in world and national affairs the way Jimmy Carter had. Richard Nixon wrote books and he had a library and so forth, but he was quite disgraced. Other presidents died before that their post-presidencies could take off. Carter really wrote the book on that, and then you've seen other presidents, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, to some extent Barack Obama, build off the model that Jimmy Carter created, but none other than maybe Bill Clinton has been as effective. Jimmy Carter ended wars. Jimmy Carter built countless homes. He inspired public service. He did so many
projects. He was so energetic in his post-presidential years that I think it really, that is one of his great legacies.
Yeah, indeed. He was also blessed, having said that, with 40 plus years of post-presidential life, which not everyone has had. Do you think it's fair to say he was respected on both sides of the aisle, just listening to the sorts of tributes that we've heard the last couple of days?
I think within a certain measure he was. Jonathan Alter, who is a Washington Monthly contributing editor and biographer of Jimmy Carter, said that Carter was too conservative for liberals during his presidency and too liberal for conservatives during his presidency. He was somewhat a man without a country politically. And he's and he had a kind of curmudgeonly way about him, a lack of small talk, in a way not a terribly effective backslapping politician, that has made elected officials of both parties a little wary of embracing him. Yet I do think there is respect for what he did on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, even the incoming President-elect Donald Trump has paid his respects in front of Carter's coffin. He's going to be at the ceremony today in Washington. He described Jimmy Carter as a truly good man. What do you think is one word that you'll hear again and again associated with people as they pay tribute to Jimmy Carter?
I think good isn't a bad choice for the one-word description of Jimmy Carter. He really genuinely had deep moral fiber, deep moral vision. He was a very, very devout man, curious blend of both scientific acumen and deep spiritual faith and Christian faith. Almost an Enlightenment character. He was somebody who was a farmer, a nuclear engineer, a businessman, a nonprofit leader, a president. He really was a person of amazing capacities, but at the heart of it was a steel moral clarity that I think will be his defining attribute in history.
And of course, he won the presidency in 1977, promising good government and honest talk. And I'm just wondering, I mean, this is casting your mind back a very long way, I know, but what was it about the context in which President Carter became president that made those very simple promises really resonate with the American people?
You know, it's been a lot of years, and people of a certain age will remember it's almost innocent at the time, but Richard Nixon's prevarications, lying, and corruption really damaged the country's psyche. The public didn't want to believe it. They were scandalized by it. Jimmy Carter was the antidote and sold himself, famously saying, "I'll never lie to you." And he didn't really. He exaggerated. He did what other politicians do. But at his core, he was a moral and virtuous leader, arguably to his own discrediting, because he could have used more guile. He could have used more ability to manipulate, ability to craft unlikely alliances, a little bit more of the politician in him and less of the rector. But at the time, it was a breath of fresh air for the country.
And yet, 4 years later, he lost resoundingly to Ronald Reagan in 1981. I mean, what do you think changed? Or do you think perhaps it was the difficult circumstances of his presidency, the economy, hostage crisis. I mean, what, in your opinion, was the reason for that massive change of fortunes for him?
I think Jimmy Carter was elected and then failed to be reelected for the same reason, which is in the 1970s, the old liberal playbook wasn't working. We had both high inflation and high unemployment, which the textbook economics said couldn't happen. We had the beginnings of the monopoly problem that is now with us, with OPEC controlling oil prices. We had an anti-colonial, radical, powerful Iranian revolution that threw things off. And Carter struggled to find new policies to deal with these new realities, and pick some that were visionary, like energy independence, others like transportation deregulation that turned out to be quite catastrophic. But he was casting about for new ideas to govern in a time of new realities, and he never landed on the right mix and the right message. Ronald Reagan came in with a clear, somewhat reactionary, atavistic, but easy to understand, free market fundamentalist view of cutting government and unleashing capitalism that the public thought was a better answer than Carter had. And we've lived with the consequences ever since.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to what's happening today, Paul, I mean, there's this state funeral in Washington. I mean, fair to say that's the greatest honor that can be given to a US citizen, that sort of funeral. I mean, really rare, isn't it, in this highly polarized political world to see such a roll call of high-profile individuals from both parties gathered in the same place at the same time?
No, and for somebody like me who's a little bit old-fashioned and believes that the presidency deserves decorum, that Carter is getting a little of that is a measure of reassurance. I wouldn't read too much in it. We have a president who's saber rattling in the Western Hemisphere and ran on issues that he's now backing off of, within even before he's been inaugurated. I think we're not in for a time of bipartisan comedy, but we have a little island of that at this somber moment.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Paul Glastris, former chief speechwriter to President Bill Clinton. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.